So this is the beginning of section 3, which is our final section of the MedMetrix certification program. We're going to hear from OSHA and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's globally harmonized system. And they'll give you a little explanation on why it's important to understand about this type of MedMetrix training.
Everyone working around hazardous chemicals and other toxic substances has a right to know of possible dangers and how to protect themselves. Ensuring that everyone knows the potential risks, what to do if exposed, and how to respond have always been at the heart of OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard since it was issued almost 30 years ago. Since that time, the HazCom standard has been saving lives and protecting the safety and health of employees and employers in workplaces with potentially serious hazards. Thousands of injuries, illnesses, and deaths have been prevented because of the training, labeling, and information required by this rule. Now it's time for another step. OSHA is making good protection even better. With the strong backing of manufacturers, employers, and unions, OSHA is raising the bar, improving safety and health for everyone. We are updating HazCom to meet the needs of our changing world. Today, we live and work in a global environment. Different and sometimes conflicting national and international requirements can create confusion among those who need important, clear, concise information to protect themselves as quickly as possible. To help make this happen, we are incorporating the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, GHS for short, into our HazCom standard. In taking this step, we're joining the ranks with other nations to upgrade protections, standardize hazard communication, and reduce trade barriers. It's a win-win that will benefit all, and after implementation will save millions of dollars each year. Historically, under HazCom, there were no firm rules for what a label or material safety data sheet should look like, or how information was presented. Now, under the new standard, instead of having a variety of different safety data sheets and labels, the hazard warnings will all be the same regardless of who produces them or where they're produced. And even more importantly, the message is the same regardless of who sees it. There's a big difference. The new labels alert people to potential hazards and provide important details on how to handle chemicals safely. They tell you not only what you need to know, but also what you need to do in a way that everyone can clearly and easily understand. Here's an example. In the past, warning labels for a toxic chemical could have looked like this or like this. Both of these sample labels for the same chemical would have been in compliance with OSHA's requirement. But now, under the new updated standard, a prototype label would look more like this. In fact, this step represents more than just pictograms and labels. It's a whole new system, one in which everyone is using the same underlying criteria to classify chemicals. Behind every image are uniform organization and classification systems that spell out the potential hazards and protections in terms that everyone worldwide can understand. Whether you're working with chemicals, manufacturing them or transporting them, or supervising employees exposed to them. In this new system, every hazardous chemical and substance not only carries a uniform label with information that is easier to understand, but also provides warnings that are clearer, necessary action more obvious, and protections readily apparent. In short, the new HazCom standard, now aligned with GHS, will provide a simple alert system to save lives and prevent injuries and illnesses worldwide. The new system has been years in the making. It's already a reality in a growing number of countries, and even more are taking steps in the same direction. This harmonized international system will help reduce trade barriers in the global chemical market by aligning the U.S. with Europe, Asia, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, and many other nations. When the HAZCOM standard took effect in 1985, workers got the right to know. That is, the right to know what the potential effects of exposure to hazards might be. But the right to have labels or material safety data sheets did not always mean that it was easy for workers to understand that information. Today, with the new globally harmonized standard, workers are now getting the right to understand. That means not only knowing about potential hazards, but also better understanding what the warning means, what to do if exposed, and how to protect oneself. With this new system, workers in the United States and workers worldwide will have the same simple, concise information they need to understand how to prevent injuries and illnesses and save lives. Nothing could be more important than that.
So based on OSHA's hazard communication standards, there is a thing called a GHS, or Global Harmonization Standards. So why do we have a global harmonization standard? So what are the benefits of adopting a GHS system? Well, it increases the quality and consistency of information. It reduces confusion, increased comprehensions of what hazards there are. It improves understanding by employees. It helps address any kind of literacy problems. For example, MSDS now is SDS, so you get a kind of a consistent understanding of everything. Some of the notable changes that GHS caused, for example, in SDS, or the safety data sheets that we talked about during your certification program, the labels are more defined and will now require the product identifier, a pictograph, you'll see that in a little bit, a signal word, the hazard statements, precautionary statements, name, address, and phone number of the manufacturers. And now, as you know, it's not called the safety data sheet. It's now called the safety data sheet, not the material safety data sheet. And all of them do now use a 16-section format. Let's dig a little deeper into the safety data sheets. They replace the MSDS sheets. They must accompany hazard chemicals. They're a more complete resource for all the details. And the new standards require that manufacturers and distributors use the 16 sections, and they have to be in a user-friendly format. They must be in English. And in summary, sections 1 through 8 contain general information helpful to those who need to get it quickly. And then the sections 9 through 16 contain technical and scientific information about the product. Let's Go a little further into section 1, which is the identification. This section identifies the chemical and any other names that it may be known as. It also lists the recommended uses of the product and restrictions on its use. It provides a contact name for the supplier, including name, address, phone number, and emergency contact. This is why we tell you in your primary certification course that you always must have the safety data sheets with you in a notebook, and also every one of your spray bottles must have labels on them, because it has identification and information that could be important in a quick manner, and also it follows all the OSHA regulations. Section 2 of the safety data sheets contain the hazard identification. Hazard classifications of the chemical. It has pictograms. We'll get into that a little bit later. Hazard and precautionary statements. It has certain signal words. It has description of any hazard not otherwise classified. So HNOC, hazard not otherwise classified, in section 2. What are the signal words that are utilized? Well, they're used, first of all, to indicate the severity of any type of a hazard. Danger is used for the more severe hazards. Warning is used for the less severe hazards. So only one signal word will be used per label. If there's more than one hazard, the most severe signal word would be used. So if something is a combination and part of it is a warning and part of it is a danger, they're going to default to the more severe signal word, which would be danger. Section 3 is the information on the ingredients that goes into the chemicals, chemical names, their common names, their numbers or ingredient percentage or the cutoff limits, mixtures, if it's concentrated or if it is ready to use. Trade secrets, a statement on the specific chemical identity or concentration that has been withheld. If you want to appreciate how far we've come and why the GHS was really necessary to kind of make everything consistent, if you look at from 1787, how we looked at what poison was, all the way up from 1862 to even to 1945, like they're saying it smells like musty hay, to give someone an idea that that might be poison. Well, if you think about it, at that point, if you're smelling it, you've just inhaled poison. So at least now there are labels that will allow you to know if something is poisonous and not make the mistake that our predecessors have made in the past. So we've really come quite a long way. Moving on to section 4, the first aid measures. Again, these are part of the first 8 sections that should be readily accessible for quick decisions. So section 4, first aid measures. It contains initial care that should be given by untrained responders. So the safety data sheet form is specific about what should be done if someone is accidentally exposed. So there's a picture to kind of tell you what you should do in the event that you need to provide first response. Section 5 talks about firefighting measures, and it provides recommendations for fighting fire that was caused by the chemical that is being utilized. And it's got to include the equipment that's not appropriate for the situation or chemical, and a hazardous combustion byproduct that might be created when the chemical burns. So the next slide, you're going to see a video that's kind of an extreme example that water was used, and it was the inappropriate chemical or the inappropriate firefighting response to this particular problem. So you'll see that again, it's a very extreme example. Section 6 talks about accidental release measures. So it describes the appropriate response if there's a spill, a leak, or a release, and how to contain and clean up to prevent or minimize exposure. And then, of course, what protective equipment is recommended to be used if there is an accidental release. Section 7 of the SDS talks about handling and storage and gives you conditions for safe storage for chemicals. So the picture on your left obviously is a terrible looking janitorial closet. Hopefully ours never looked that way. Picture on the right is where it's organized, the labels are visible, clean and neat. That's obviously the way that we want all of you to make your janitorial closets. If you've got one in your buildings or the facilities you're cleaning, make sure that it's neat and clean and it's a safe condition for storing chemicals. Section 8 of the SDS sheet talks about exposure control in your PPE. So it gives you lists exposure limits, the types of engineering controls to use, and kind of lists the protective equipment that are personal protective equipment you could minimize. So gloves, masks, visors, goggles, if you've got type of antiseptic or soap or water, something that would help you to minimize your exposure. So those were sections 1 through 8 of the safety data sheet that we went through. Now we're going to go through 9 through 16 a little bit quicker. 9 is the physical and chemical properties of that particular product. 10 is how stable and how it reacts to different things in the environment. And 11 is the toxicological information of that particular chemical. Section 12 through 14, 12 talks about the ecological information of the particular product. 13, how to dispose of it or considerations when you dispose of it. 14 is if you're transporting it, whether it can be shaken around in the back of a truck or it needs to be secure. Finally, sections 15 and 16. 15 is the regulatory information that's required typically by OSHA or the EPA. And section 16 is any other information that would be relevant to that particular chemical. Staying with the labels and moving on to shipping containers. There are label requirements now that all chemicals must have when they're shipped: the product identifier, the signal word, a hazard statement, the pictograms, and we're going to go into those in just a little bit. Precautionary statements, and number 6, name, address, and phone number of the responsible party needs to be visible. Just a quick slide to give you an overview of the different pictograms that you would see on shipping labels, and we'll touch on each one of these in just a second. But one top left, we'll go left, down and up, the health hazard, the flame, the exclamation mark, the gas cylinder, corrosion, exploding bomb, flame over circle, environment, and the skull and crossbones. So we'll go into each one of these separately. So what does the health hazard pictogram mean? And it talks about the health hazards, what would be hazardous to your health. So this particular product could be a carcinogen, it could cause mutation, could cause problems with reproductive organs, respiratory issues, target organ toxicity, or it could make it hard to breathe, aspiration toxicity. So each one, and we'll go through these briefly, but each one could cause this type of a hazard, and so it needs to be labeled that way. The next one's pretty straightforward. If you see a flame pictogram on a outside of a container, it could be flammable, it could cause blowing up or pyrophorics, it could be self-heating, it could emit flammable gas. If you see the exclamation mark on a container, the product could be an irritant for skin and eye, be sensitive to the skin, acute toxicity, it have a narcotic effect, respiratory irritant, or it could be hazardous to the ozone layer. That is non-mandatory. In other words, the others are mandatory. If it has that mark on it, they don't have to identify if it's hazardous to the ozone layer. If you see a gas cylinder, it simply means gases are under pressure in that product. If there is a label that's a corrosion sign, it could mean that it could cause skin burns or corrosion, eye damage, or it even could be corrosive to metals that it comes in contact with. If you see a label with an exploding bomb, it just means that there could be explosives in there. Okay, if you see a flame over a circle, it means it's an oxidizer. And just as an aside, an oxidizer is defined as a substance that oxidizes another substance, a chemical other than a blasting agent or explosive that initiates or promotes combustion in other materials. So if something needs oxygen in order to continue a flame, that would potentially be an oxidizer, or that chemical could contribute to that flame. This particular one almost needs no words to it. You can see from the pictogram that it's bad for the environment, and it could cause toxicity in water. And the grand poobah of them all, skull and crossbones. If you see this on that chemical, it could cause fatal, it could be fatal or toxic to someone that would come in contact with it. So now that you've looked at safety data sheets and how much of a requirement they are for where we work and what we do, what would you say is wrong with this picture as you look at it? Very first thing you look at, there's an unmarked bottle. Does not have a safety data sheet label on it, so you don't know what's inside of it. Certainly is disorganized. Number two, we want to keep our janitor closets or supply areas very organized. And then as you can look through there, as you know, there's non-approved JanPro products in there. You know, we provide a starter kit of hospital-grade disinfectants and chemicals, and so these would be non-approved. So those are three things that are wrong with it. Always check yourself, make sure that your janitor closets look good, and that all of your bottles have safety data sheets on them or labels on them, that you've got the SDS sheets in a notebook available in the event that you need them, especially as we're doing hospital grade cleaning or medical or healthcare cleaning, which is what MedMetrix program is designed for, is to make sure that as you're going into these, you are knowledgeable and aware, so that when an inspection occurs by the state or by the healthcare facility, that you're passing it from your side, because you know that your bottles need to be labeled, you know that you've got safety data sheets, and that your janitor closet is organized. A GHS label is very similar to a SDS label, very similar, very minor differences. We just touched lightly on trade secrets that don't necessarily have to be or aren't on an SDS or GHS label. It allows that specific chemical identity to be protected when it's a legitimate trade secret, and it specifies the conditions for protection or for the release when there is a safety and health need for that information. And it also can talk, maybe withhold the percentage of a substance in a mixture, which is considered to be a type of trade secret subject to the provision in the rule. So you just need to know that there are potential trade secrets that manufacturers or distributors may not put on their label that they feel are proprietary to their product. And that is the end of this section.